Did you know that according to the Platter wine guide, the best Bordeaux red wine in the entire country doesn't come from Stellenbosch, it doesn't come from Franschhoek either. It comes from a valley so obsessed with Sauvignon Blanc that it even ran its own Sauvignon Blanc ad campaign once. But 2 years running, Platter's top red Bordeaux-style blend in South Africa has come out of Constantia. Now that is the wine region that your wine textbook will also file under sweet wine, white wine, and see also dead Napoleon's penchant. But today's curious wine of the day is the Constantia Glen III, which is the sibling to Constantia Glen V, which was Platter's Wine Guide Red Bordeaux blend of the year 2026. Our bottle today is a Merlot-led blend from an estate that is 75% planted to red cultivars in the most famous white wine address in South Africa. And in this video, we're going to see whether that really pays off. Before we get into why this red wine matters, you need to understand the reputation that it's quietly rebelling against. Because in 1821, on a volcanic rock in the middle of the South Atlantic, roughly 2,000 kilometers from anywhere, a dying Napoleon Bonaparte turned down almost everything that his doctor offered him, except for one little thing. He kept asking for sweet wine from a valley just outside Cape Town, a wine called Vin de Constance. And Napoleon wasn't alone in this obsession, because Jane Austen's heroines drink Vin de Constance in order to mend their broken hearts. Baudelaire, yes, even Baudelaire wrote it into a poem, ranking Vin de Constance above his lover's lips, which, if you've read much Baudelaire, you know is a pretty unhinged thing to say. So after all those ancient pop culture references, the wine textbooks of the world decided that sweet wine is what Constantia should be remembered for. A dead emperor's deathbed craving, if you like. At least that's the legend. That is the ghost in the room. And it's exactly that legend that Constantia Glen looked at and decided to completely ignore. So let's meet the team. Constantia Glen's cellar master is a man called Justin van Wyk, and he's essentially the winemaking personification of a mullet hairstyle, because he does all his supremely classic tuxedo-style, serious business in the front type winemaking at Constantia Glen. And this is 80% of all of his energies. But then there's also the party at the back style wines, which come in the form of his Van Wyk family wines range, where he works with all sorts of unusual cultivars and toys with skin ferment white wines and produces some absolutely incredible Swartland style white blends and stunning cool climate Syrahs. But we'll talk more about that on another day, because right now we need to get back to Constantia Glen. Constantia Glen is an estate on the northern half of the standalone wine ward of Constantia, which is right down on the Cape Peninsula. And here's the thing about Constantia Glen, it's planted with a whopping 75% Bordeaux red cultivars. Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Malbec. These plantings are strong conviction made manifest. The Constantia Glen team looked at the most famous white wine address in the entire country and decided to bet the farm on red wine. Now, to understand why that's not insane, why it might in fact be quietly brilliant, you need to understand the ward of Constantia and how it is not one homogeneous whole. It's two distinct kingdoms that happen to share a single postal code. What you're looking at here is Cape Town, Table Mountain behind, doing its dramatic, slightly smug backdrop thing. Now follow the mountain around, because the Constantia Valley doesn't sit in front of it, it curls around the back of it, draped over the slopes as though the mountain were wearing a mink coat, kind of like a Russian model at a Tyson boxing match in the 90s. And therein lies the whole trick really, because as you move around the mountain, the slopes change the way that they face, obviously. And the way in which a slope faces decides how much sun it gets, when it gets it, and ultimately what the slope is allowed to become. So when you see this clearly, you realize that Constantia is not a catch-all wine descriptor, it's more of a palatial pillar built around a mountain where every room gets different light. So if you head to the southern end, the Steenberg end, the low-lying sites, then you're staring out over False Bay. These slopes face south and southeast, and the ocean down there is genuinely, properly cold. The wind comes straight off it, and it certainly doesn't apologize along the way. So this is the Constantia you see in the textbooks. It's cool, it's crisp, it's built for white wine. But if you go up north, up towards Constantia Neck, where Constantia Glen sits, the whole conversation changes. You've got a northeast facing slopes, which are higher up, 135 to 275 meters above sea level, and you have fairly well-drained soils, and critically, it's not cold here, at least not in the way that that you've been told. And here's the bit that I find genuinely extraordinary. Sandwiched between two oceans, this place almost never gets a heat wave, the kind of brutal vine-frying heat spike that can wreck a vintage in Stellenbosch. Well, down in Constantia, the ocean swallows it like it's a thermometer in a beagle's butthole. The ocean basically acts like a massive heat sink for the entire ward. So it's not that the northern slopes are cold, it's basically that they just refuse to be hot. And that little fact really helps to make the ripening process long, slow, and stable, which is exactly what Bordeaux grapes happen to dream about at night. And what's even better than that is because of where their higher lying vineyards are situated, the Constantia Glen vines are still out there photosynthesizing like a little Venus Rumpelstiltskin in the golden hour sunlight long after the rest of the valley has dropped into shade. Constantia Valley is very much invested in their Sauvignon Blanc. And in fact, they launched an entire campaign about this a few years ago called Serious About Sauvignon. And they're not wrong to be serious about Sauvignon. In fact, Constantia Sauvignons have a distinct ageability that some other regions just don't display. And I've tasted Sauvignons that have been 15 years old, which were absolutely mesmerizing. But that aside, during that time, Constantia Winery did run this big campaign about Sauvignon Blanc, and they funded an entire viticultural study on all of the Constantia wine estate vineyard blocks. And it measured everything from ambient temperature to aspect to solar radiation. And the whole point of the study was to prove how good these sites were for Sauvignon Blanc. But for Constantia Glen, at least, the data came back with the overwhelming message that they should be planting more red grapes, which may not have played into the hands of the Constantia wine route marketing department, but it was an absolute treasure trove for Constantia Glen. It was like they'd hired a detective to find their missing cat, only to find out that the cat had secretly been running a small hedge fund in their name. Unexpected, but delightful. But rather than have me prattle on about the situation, let me hand over to Cellar Master Justin van Wyk, and I'll let him tell you the story from his perspective.
There was a big focus on Sauvignon Blanc a few years ago. And so there were some studies done, and it showed that we had a couple of our Sauvignon Blanc vineyards in very good locations for red because they were on higher solar radiation sites and also sites with great day length or sunlight hours. So we uprooted about 1.5 hectares of Sauvignon Blanc and planted those sites to Cabernet Franc and one to Cabernet Sauvignon. We're very much leaning into Cabernet Franc at the moment. We planted a vineyard in 2018 and 1 hectare more of Cabernet Franc and half a hectare of Cabernet Sauvignon. This decision to plant more of our estate to red varieties is not because we don't think that Sauvignon Blanc is well suited. We just want to plant the best varieties, not even for our specific estate, but rather for each site on the estate. Constantia Glen has got this very unique position where we have about an extra hour of sunlight on our vineyards every single day during the ripening period. We're higher up on the Vlakkenberg, and the higher up in altitude you go, the cooler the temperatures. But coupled with the cooler temperatures, we have got excellent solar radiation, and then this additional hour of sunlight in the late afternoons. And that extra hour of sunlight is essential to the ripening of our red grape varieties. And that allows us to really ripen Bordeaux varieties in a cool climate. It means that the Bordeaux varieties can ripen slowly. If they ripen slowly, they develop very complex flavor profiles and precursors. We also have excellent color and anthocyanin development, polymerization of tannins in the grapes. So our Cabernets typically only ripen in April. Cabernet Franc I feel like it's a very important component in both our Constantia Glen 3 and 5. I think the Cabernet Franc brings a wonderful floral lift to the nose of the wine. It brings fantastic tension and precision to the palate. So that's where the coolness of the region and the sort of ocean chilled winds that we get off False Bay allows for slow ripening. If you can have good slow ripening but good sunlight, I think that's the recipe for really stunning Cabernet Franc with depth and a good sort of floral essence that it gives to the wine.
Now, Justin's last few comments about Cabernet Franc become more remarkable when you realize that it's not like no one tried planting Cabernet Franc beforehand. Many estates have tried, and many estates have had absolutely dismal results. In fact, even some sites on Constantia Glen achieved dismal results. Constantia Glen has had Cabernet Franc so disappointing on one particular site that they don't even bother making red wine from it. They bleed it off into a rosé. And they have Cabernet Franc on another site, on the same farm, a stone's throw away, that makes one of the best parcels of wine that they produce each vintage. So it's the same grape, same winemaker, same year, meters apart, but one is a rosé apology and the other is the star of the show. Remarkable. I guess in that sense, Constantia's Cabernet Franc is not a grape at all. It's a test. Put it on the wrong site, wrong aspect, wrong clone, and it becomes a stinky green pepper gremlin that could be an extra during a hell scene in Little Nicky. But put it on exactly the right site and it becomes the single best wine in the cellar. Now, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer to test that particular theory because those newer Cabernet Franc blocks are still coming online. So while we're waiting, let's get back to today's wine of the day, the Constantia Glen III 2022 vintage, a Merlot-led beastie. It's 54% Merlot and then 28% Cabernet Sauvignon and 18% Cabernet Franc. But probably by now we need fewer numbers and more drinking. So let's get into the glass. Okay, so when we give this guy a little sniff, well, we get a beautifully classic nose and it's a little reserved at first, but also mysterious. It feels as if the fruit is a little reserved, hunkered down, kind of like Uncle Jerry in the dark, waiting for you to come in for your surprise birthday party. So you sense this beautiful, brooding, roasted blackcurrant fruit, touches of fennel. There is also some red cherry. And even then, maybe it's more maraschino. And there's a savory touch as well, which is beautiful. It's like a whiff of crispy roasted meat, trimmings off the edge of a leg of lamb. And then as it opens up a little bit, you also get slightly prettier notes. There's these touches of purple flowers and even a little bit of aromatic cedar. And I guess the aromatic cedar totally makes sense because this wine spent about 18 months in French barrels. 20% of those were new barrels and 50% of those are second fill. Now, as we've spoken about in other videos, you might look at those oak stats and think that the oak should be more prominent. But often when you have intense, slow ripening, concentrated fruit, you'll find that the oak has to work just a little bit harder in order to poke through that fruit. And that's why you can't really make a prediction about a wine just by looking at the technical sheet. You have to actually taste it, which is what I'm going to do now. So, despite being a Merlot-led wine, and this would perhaps lead you to think that there should be loads of red fruit going on, the actual first impression is a powerful black fruit entry. It's maraschino cherry, blackcurrant, even a hint of sugar plum, but all the fruit is quite buttoned down. And perhaps that is what makes Constantia red wine so intriguing because it can be fairly ripe. If you look at this wine, it's 14.5% alcohol, and yet the fruit never presents as jammy or overt. A lovely addition is that as the blackcurrant cassis moves towards the tail, it brightens up a little and does present some of the more Merlot-driven touches of sour cherry, which really lifts the whole back end of the wine. It gives a sense that while you can enjoy it now, it's really going to unfurl and develop over the next 10 years or so. Now, if you're watching the video because you scanned the QR code from one of our monthly wine boxes, or perhaps you just discovered it in your watched next section on YouTube, either way, you should know that Constantia Glen is not the only estate that is producing some incredible red wines in this little valley, best known for sweet wine and Sauvignon Blanc. Just around the corner, over a hill and up a couple of 100 meters, we have the remarkably high-lying vineyards of Eagle's Nest, and they are indeed producing Sauvignon Blanc, but they also produce a mind-blowing premium Shiraz from some pretty crazy terraced vineyards. So if that sounds intriguing to you, then make sure you catch that video that I've left for you at the end of this one. And until next time, stay curious and always drink niche.